A couple of minutes into filming, I always have this paranoid moment of like, did I even turn my camera on? And then I have to check, and the answer is always yes, I did. Hello world, welcome to the second day of Vlogtober. Today I want to tell you all about the books that I read in September, and there are quite a few of them. I read 9 books. I highly recommend you get yourself a cup of tea and settle in, because it's probably going to be a long video. I have the tendency to talk too much about books, which to be fair is why I have this channel, so you know. The first book I finished in September is Nimona by Noelle Stevenson, which I borrowed from my friend Afe. This is a graphic novel, and it's about Nimona, who is a character that just kind of shows up in the life of this notorious villain and becomes his sidekick, or wants to become his sidekick. There was a bit of hype surrounding this book, so my expectations were quite high. In the end, I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it as much as I really wanted to. It strikes a good balance between the funny comedic side and the more serious aspects of the story, but it just didn't leave that much of a lasting impression on me. So I liked it, didn't rock my world, gave it 3 out of 5 stars, probably closer to 3.5, but as you know, that's not an option on Goodreads. Next up, I started the John Green books for the hashtag Turtles All The Way countdown, which I'm participating in. First book I read for that was Looking for Alaska, which is not something that I read before. I didn't know much about it, except I knew that Alaska was a person and didn't refer to the state. I might do a separate video later this month in which I talk about all of the John Greens once I've actually read all of them. So I won't go into too much detail now, but I enjoyed the book. I don't think this is something that I would have picked up for myself. If I hadn't been sent a copy, I probably wouldn't have read it ever, but it was fine. I didn't enjoy the plot that much, but John Green is really good at writing friendships and friend groups, so that's the part of this book that I really enjoyed. I then read An Abundance of Katherines, also by John Green, obviously, which is about this boy who has dated 19 girls named Catherine, and they've all broken up with him. His friend takes him on a road trip after the latest breakup, and they end up in this little town where they kind of, you know, befriend the locals and work for the summer. Again, the plot doesn't appeal to me that much, especially because in this book there isn't that much of a plot. It's mostly just them going about their summer day activities. But the way that John Green writes the interactions between these characters and kind of the easygoing way that the story progresses were actually quite nice and relaxing to read. I rated this book 3 out of 5 stars as well, though again it was probably closer to 3.5. I then read Tangleweed and Brine by Deirde Sullivan. I was already planning to read this book, and then like I said, I came across a signed copy in the Gutter bookshop in Dublin, and I just had to have it. This book features a bunch of fairy tale retellings. Most of the stories haven't actually been taken that far away from the original fairy tale, but they're a bit darker and more mysterious, and also the line between good and bad is considerably more blurry. All of the stories are in second person, which is something that you really only see in short stories, but it's something that I really love. I wasn't familiar with all of the original fairy tales, but that didn't lessen my enjoyment at all, because one of my favorite stories from this collection is actually one that I don't know the original of. I also really like the illustrations. I rated this book 4 out of 5 stars, and I highly recommend it. Next up, I read American Gods by Neil Gaiman. I always say that Neil Gaiman is one of my favorite authors, but there is so much of his work that I haven't read. Like I mentioned in a previous video, I bought this edition quite cheaply in Dublin at Chapters. I didn't really know what to expect from the story. I just knew that I wanted to read it before watching the TV show, which I was really interested in as well. Now that I've read it, I really don't understand why it's taken me so long to pick up this book. I've always had this idea that I didn't feel drawn to it, but it has a lot of things that I like, and it's really good, it's really well written, so I don't understand my own reasoning here. I rated it 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. In reality, I would say it's probably a little bit closer to 4.5 stars, but whenever I find myself wanting to rate something with half stars, I have to make a decision, you know, do I go up, do I go down? And in this case, I figured I could afford to go up. I then read Paper Towns, which was the 3rd John Green book of the month, and the only one that I'd actually read before. This book is kind of similar to Looking for Alaska in the way that there is this mystery to solve surrounding a girl who was there and now isn't. I do have to say that having read this book before and knowing the ending did change how I read the book this time around, but I actually think it's a change for the better. I felt like I had more insight into the characters and their motivations and their personalities, whereas the first time around I was just so focused on solving the mystery, you know, connecting the dots, finding all the clues. I also really like the whole road trip part. That's definitely my favorite part of the book, and probably also my favorite of the film adaptation. While I was in Ireland, I also read this little book of quotes called Overheard in Dublin, which Leon bought secondhand at Vibes and Scribes. I borrowed it from her because I was starting to run out of things to read. It wasn't anything that interesting, just a collection of quotes that people had overheard other people say in public in Dublin. Most of them only really work if you're Irish and live in Dublin specifically, or if you are not Irish but you have such an extensive knowledge of modern day Dublin culture that you understand all the references. Some of them were funny in a more general way, but a lot of them were very specific. But it was fine, it was just a quick little in-between read that I finished in like a night. On the plane back to Amsterdam, I read Through the Woods by Emily Carroll because I picked up a cheap copy of that in Ireland as well. Like I said in a previous video, I first read this one during the Booktubeathon of last year, and it's something that I've really always wanted to own. It was also a very nice way to kind of get back into autumn, October, Halloween vibes, because this is genuinely a very scary book. Finally, I read the fourth John Green book of the month, which was Will Grayson, Will Grayson. Probably because this story was co-written by David Levithan, it felt quite different in tone than the previous books. It took me a while to get into this book. I did really like the last couple of chapters, but that didn't completely outweigh the fact that the rest of the story just didn't really do that much for me. I ended up rating this book 3 out of 5 stars, which seems to be my default for John Green books. So those were all the books I read in September. I think it was quite a good reading month. I definitely made a bit of a dent in my reading challenge, even though I'm still behind. I also really enjoyed all of the reading that I did in September, and I think that's the most important thing. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of the books that I talked about in this video and how you feel about them. I hope you had a good reading month as well. Thank you for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you again tomorrow for the next Vlogtober video. I've only just begun. Bye!